I'm Leah Butler Smith, and today we're interviewing Claire Wills-Harrison, who is an amazing lawyer. She's been working with the elderly, doing everything she possibly can to protect the elderly, and she's going to explain to you in this interview why that is and share with us as many things that we can get into this interview as possible that are going to help all of us to restore our freedoms. So over to Claire to please introduce yourself, lovely lady, and let everybody know your background and your profession, and give us a big picture of who you are.
So I'm Claire Wills-Harrison is my full name. I have been a practicing lawyer for 20 years now. I have worked at a number of different firms. I was a partner in 2012 at a firm on the outskirts of London, and I decided to move out to the countryside, and in doing so I set up my own firm. I am qualified by way of SILEX, so my full official job title is a Chartered Fellow of the Institute of Legal Executives. I'm also a fully accredited member of Solicitors for the Elderly, and I carry the OCCP award. And the realm of law that I practice in is what's called succession law, which means that I deal with a lot of probate cases after people have died, and before that I'm dealing with things that they might need to put in place to help them as they're getting older. So I work with a lot of elderly clientele, some of which are obviously still living in their own homes, but many of whom are in care. So my job takes me into care homes and hospitals a lot. So that's a little bit about my background.
Yes, and you know, obviously I know you very well now. We've come to know each other for lots of different reasons, but it would be really interesting for everyone to hear your timeline of how you've come to know Keep Britain Free, how you've come to the thoughts and the experiences that you've had this year in 2020. So starting right from when we sort of all knew that there was something not very good happening in the community, the virus was in the country. So just give us your sort of the whole timeline of what happened for you.
So let's go back to March then, when we were obviously seeing reports coming out of China and then Italy that, you know, people were seemingly ill. There was a virus, and it was all very worrying, as I'm sure it was for everybody. And to be honest, I was quite confused about the lockdown, because I've always believed that you quarantine vulnerable and sick people, not healthy people. But in saying that, I was of the opinion that, okay, well, maybe the government know something that we don't, because they're working with SAGE and they're saying that they're working with the best scientists and they're following the science. And so if they say that we need to lock down for a couple of weeks and that is going to help the elderly and vulnerable, I can live with that, because I don't want the elderly and vulnerable to die. So I think most of the country, if not all, were kind of that opinion at the start. And my thinking behind that was that, okay, so the government are obviously going to be working with all the top scientists over the world where this has already happened. You know, we were kind of behind, weren't we, a lot of Europe. So in my head, they were going to be working with all these scientists and, of course, doing postmortems on people that may have then started to die of the virus, to find out what it did to the body and the best way to treat it. And about a week into lockdown, I started seeing reports of doctors that were speaking out about ways that things should be done, and concerns that they had, and this wasn't on mainstream media, this was on what you would call alternative media, and they were being shut down. I don't mean shut down by, you know, oh, we don't want to talk to you. They were being taken off social media platforms, and that seemed to me to be really odd. So that raised a bit of a red flag with me, and I thought, well, I wonder what's going on here. Started having a look at what they were saying, and started to get concerned really about why these doctors were not given a voice. Many of them are very eminent. You've got Dr. Andrew Kaufman, there was Sunetra Gupta saying, the same things really. And also for me, it was really concerning when I found out that post-mortems were not going to be necessary. So that started me looking at various things, including figures on the ONS website, the stats, how many people had died in the flu season in 2017-18, which was a lot of people, over 50,000, and we didn't have a lockdown then. So I started I was getting to the stage that I couldn't rationalise, if you like, the decisions that the government were making. And then it really unravelled for me on the work front, because it started to affect my clients. And that's really when it hit home to me that actually what the policies have done is damaged people and not helped them.
Yeah. So were you actually seeing evidence of the people inside the care homes? Because I think it actually would be really useful for you to explain to people what life's like for the elderly in the care homes.
So obviously right at the beginning of lockdown, you couldn't go into a care home. Whether you were a relative or whether you were a professional, there was a blanket ban on going in. There was a protective ring, I think they called it, thrown around those homes. So it was very difficult, obviously, for anybody to go inside and have a meeting or see their loved one. And that's why we ended up with things like window visits and stuff like that. So what was going on inside at that time, I can't tell you with my own eyes. I went in and I saw and I spoke to people, because you couldn't do that. You could have phone calls and you could speak to the home staff and you could have a window visit, but that was pretty much it. And what it meant for the people that are in the homes is that, of course, they were effectively locked in there. They weren't allowed out. There was no popping out for shopping or anything like that. I know they get their food and everything, but there was no going outside, okay, not into the garden even, locked in the home. Now, unfortunately, at the start of lockdown, care homes were not provided with enough PPE and things like that, and they had a big discharge out of hospitals into care homes. They had more people to look after, and care home staff obviously had to follow the same rules as everybody else, so that if they became unwell, they had to self-isolate. So in lots of cases, there was a staff shortage as well in the homes, in some homes, and no access to bank staff or anybody that could help. So in some homes, the situation was that there was not enough staff to look after the residents, so they locked the residents in their rooms because I'm guessing they felt that they were keeping them safe. Now, that isn't something that I've seen. That's something that has come about because one of my extended family members has died after being in care, and that is what we have been told happened. And that family member's death certificate says neglect. They died of neglect. So,
that's shocking, isn't it?
So
it was really...
Can I just ask, why couldn't they get more staff in? Why wasn't that something you would have presumed that the government, given that the whole lockdown was supposed to be protecting, especially the elderly, that they weren't doing something about that themselves, that they weren't trying to recruit people to get them into the care homes? I mean, for heaven's sake, they had lots of NHS staff that didn't have anything to do. They could have asked them to go and support the care homes to protect the elderly. So do you know why they didn't?
Well, historically, care homes have always been the poor cousin to the NHS. And I think it was obviously very publicly stated, and we were all made aware that the NHS was going to get everything that it needed to get through this time. And in fact, as you've just said, perhaps it didn't need quite everything that was thrown at it, because there were staff that didn't have anything to do. So historically, care homes have always been the poor cousin to the NHS, and never really had the same treatment, and that's sad, because they treat a lot of very sick people actually in care homes that probably by rights sometimes should be in hospital, but there isn't normally enough room for them. Mm-hmm. Of course, there was plenty of room in hospitals. We now know that, okay? The vast majority of hospitals were not overrun. Why those staff in the NHS that didn't have anything to do couldn't be sent to help, I don't know. That is obviously a decision that would have needed to have been made at government level and wasn't.
Yeah, and that's what's been exposed more and more, and there have been articles now, thankfully. But prior to the articles starting to come out, which has really been much more recent, all of those months before that, nobody had any idea of really what life was like for the elderly and how they were suffering and in what different ways they were suffering. But another thing that we're also aware of is, of course, that doctors weren't going into the care home. So not only were they not being given the support they needed one-to-one with care, but they were also not being seen by doctors if they had any health problems. And also we've been made aware that some policy came down the line to the care homes that said, actually, if this elderly person becomes unwell with symptoms of COVID, they will not be taken back into hospital.
Yeah, so that is information that's been passed to me by care home whistleblowers that have been very clear that there was a discharge of elderly patients from hospital into care homes to empty the hospitals. On discharge, the vast majority of those people had not had a COVID test. So you were taking those people and putting them into a vulnerable population without knowing whether they were ill, and therefore should have still been in hospital if they were. And then the minute they got into the care homes, they were told to have do not admit to hospital orders placed on the residents. And obviously the vast majority of residents in a care home are elderly, okay, and that's my remit that I work in. Now, I understand that perhaps similar things have happened to other care institutions that look after younger people, but those younger people that have complex needs and disabilities, and I understand the same has happened there. Mm-hmm. Now, on the 24th of August, so just over a week ago, the Queen's Nursing Institute reported on the blanket use of DNRs on all residents in care homes. They've done a survey. A lady called Alison Leary wrote the report, and she works out of South Bank University. And it's been highlighted in there that 1 in 10 care homes were told by the NHS to change resuscitation orders for patients without those patients' consent. Wow. Okay, so 1 in 10 that, based on her modelling from the survey that she's put out, this is the information that she's got. So she's obviously very concerned and is calling for an inquiry into this, which I believe is something that's needed, very much so. Now, her report focuses pretty much on the things like the DNRs and how that was a policy decision that care homes, nursing homes were asked to implement. But there are some other concerning things, such as the use of certain protocols, end-of-life protocols, and the drugs that were used. Now, there was a Daily Mail article, and that was on the 12th of July, 2020, And that was Holly Bancroft and Stephen Adams that reported on the number of prescriptions for midazolam, which can kill the frail, doubled during the pandemic. So these claims are not verified, but over the past 5 years, about 15,000 prescriptions for midazolam to be used outside of hospital are written each month, okay, in England. In April, 38,582 prescriptions were written.
Wow.
Yeah, so there is a chap called Professor Patrick Policino, I'm not sure which way to pronounce it. He's actually a retired neurologist, and he was instrumental in raising concerns about the use of midazolam a decade ago, i.e. the Liverpool care pathway and how people were put on end-of-life treatment, because midazolam brings forward patients' deaths, basically. And he thinks that something similar has happened now, okay? Midazolam depresses respiration and hastens death, and this is a quote from him, it changes end-of-life care into euthanasia. That's his words. So he also claims that there was an official flowchart given to health workers intended to help them decide if people sick with COVID were suitable for intensive care, which he believes wrongly consigned those deemed frail to end of life. So that is, along with the DNRs, for me, I would like an inquiry into that aspect as well. It's clear that midazolam prescriptions increased, and from the whistleblower accounts that I have had, there was one very concerning report about the use of morphine and midazolam with regular pain medication having been withdrawn, no paracetamol, no pain patches, no codeine, straight onto morphine and straight onto midazolam. Now midazolam, as we've just heard, slows respiration. It's used to suppress agitation, if you like, which you would be agitated if you were an elderly person having been locked up and not seen your family for 6 months, taken off all your normal pain medication. I think I would be agitated. And there's other reasons why people can be agitated, depending on what their needs are and why they're in care. So that midazolam is used to suppress that. And morphine, obviously, for pain relief. So the two combined together, because midazolam slows respiration anyway, morphine does pretty much the same. So that one particular case that I was contacted about was so distressing, because the care worker concerned was taking baby food into the care home to feed the residents, because all of their food and water had been withdrawn and they were on an end-of-life pathway with midazolam and morphine.
And this is what you did the live video about, isn't it, that went viral, and it's, I think, had over 500,000 views and has captured the attention of more than just the people. But, I don't know if you're able to speak anymore.
Yeah, following that video, I was contacted by the police, who then asked me certain things about it. At that point, I wasn't able to give them, I didn't want to give them the whistleblower's name or anything like that until I'd spoken to the whistleblower. So that particular whistleblower was going through a process, because when I'd spoken to that person, I'd said, we need to do something. We can't just put this out there. So do X, Y, and Z, so that you're taking all steps to safeguard. And I made the video with that person's permission in the hope that it would get to the police, because I was worried if one person went and said this, that perhaps it maybe wouldn't be believed or it wouldn't go where it needed to go. So I was quite glad that the police called me. That it happened to just be the wrong county. So after speaking to the whistleblower, it ended up at the CQC. I spoke to somebody. There's safeguarding now going on there. The police are involved, I believe, and I have been assured that if these end-of-life protocols are shown, because I've been told by the CQC that, of course, sometimes end-of-life protocols, which I accept, are in a person's best interest. But as I was told by the CQC, it's what happens from when that protocol is put in place to when that person dies that they are interested in, because everybody deserves to die with dignity and pain-free, and not be starved to death or something like that. So they're very interested in making sure that period, if the decision was right at all, if the period between that decision and the period then of dying, that has been managed correctly. Now, the other thing which I wanted some clarity on, which the CQC did confirm, was, from my point of view, I said, if these are clinical decisions about end of life, surely the policy should be that they can only be made if a GP is visiting and assessing that person. You can't do that over the telephone, can you? And I'm assuming even if you did do it by telephone, you wouldn't be able to necessarily see the person or speak to the person. You would be taking somebody else's, i.e. the carers or the nurse, XYZ, testimony to make a decision. Now, the CQC did say that they expect clinical decisions like end of life, they would expect a visit. Now, as I said to the lady at the CQC, well, you do realise, don't you, and you must know that no GPs in any of the homes that I'm working with, and many across the country, because of the whistleblowers, there are no GP visits to homes. They do not go into homes anymore. They haven't been into a care home or a nursing home since lockdown.
So how on earth are those very frail, very vulnerable elderly patients that the government are insisting we all protect being protected? In what way?
Well, in my opinion, they're not. They've been failed miserably. We have no support services going in. So no GP visits, okay? No chiropody, no physio, no hearing aid appointments, no opticians, no family visits, and family visits are often the very thing that provide the oversight that's needed, because they will be recognising mum or dad isn't looking so good, or doesn't seem to be eating, or seems to be a bit more confused, or needs some podiatry, or would maybe like to have a haircut, anything like that. So you've literally stripped away all of those support services from the most vulnerable and elderly, which we all said we would like to protect, and we're happy to do so. What do you think is going to happen to them?
Yep.
So they can't go to hospital.
Yes, exactly. So if the government's campaign is protect grandma, save grandma, did they?
No. Wear a mask, save grandma. Unfortunately, wearing a mask won't save grandma, because if grandma's in a home, she's likely with a DNR, as has come out in the Queen's Nursing Institute report, or she is perhaps ill anyway because there's no support services going in. So wearing a mask won't protect grandma in a nursing home. What will protect grandma is a change of policy at government level to open the service back up, allow support services to go in, and allow families to go and visit their loved ones.
Because another thing that is strikingly well, it's sad, it's shocking, it's horrifying, is the fact that they haven't asked any of the elderly who've been affected in their own homes, never mind those who are being affected by being locked in their rooms in care homes. They didn't ask any of them what they would like to happen. Do they want to be protected in this way, which is to literally remove every ounce of meaning from their lives? So and we see on social media elderly people who, there's not that many on social media, but those that are expressing really deep concerns and saying, I don't want you to give up your job, your work, your life, your children's education, start wearing masks for me. Don't do that, please, in my name. And obviously they're the ones who we're hearing from, but we don't know of all of the others who haven't got access to that sort of medium and don't have the ability to find out really what's going on even and why this is happening. And you mentioned, the DNRs, and I know that was happening in hospitals as well, because they did it to my mother. They coerced my mother because they told my mother, they led her to believe through what they did say and what they didn't say, is that the DNR would be necessary in case she was not going to be resuscitated and have any kind of quality of life if that was necessary. So my mother's understanding was, well, if I have a stroke or a heart attack and it's severe enough that I'm going to be a vegetable, I'd rather you don't bother. That's her understanding. What we've come to understand with all of these policy decisions, and certainly from we've been shown emails that the care homes have sent to patients' family, and talking about the fact that if they do have any symptoms, that they're not going to be, not only will they not be sent into hospital, it will be put onto an end-of-life pathway just because they have symptoms. And what's really astonishing about that is they're not giving them the option to have another form of treatment or to even have the option to recover. They've made an assumption they will just die. And as I say, my mum was under the impression that it was in her interests. And once I explained to her that what the DNRs are actually being used for, certainly from what we've been told, that she was really, really, really shocked and really quite upset by that idea. And I know that you've given me some information about some ways that I can get around that. So I don't know if it's okay to sort of share that tip, if you like, for people.
I mean, obviously it's each decision that's made about anything legal, document-wise, is a personal decision for the person concerned, and they should take appropriate legal advice if they feel that they need to. But we do have an instrument in this country called lasting power of attorney. We have two types. One is for finances and one is for health and welfare. And within a lasting power of attorney for health and welfare, you can actually appoint one or more people, whom we call attorneys, to make decisions about your health and welfare if you cannot make them yourself. So if you don't have capacity for some reason, which might be because you're in a coma, it could be for any reason that you don't have capacity. But if you don't have capacity, they can make decisions about your health and welfare, and you have an option within that document to tick a box that says, I give my attorneys the power to consent or refuse life-sustaining treatment for me. So you can tick yes, I give them that power, or no, I don't. But if you tick yes, I give them that power, that actually overrides any advance directive that's already in place. So that should override the DNR that is in place. If somebody, of course, the other thing is that your mother should be perfectly able to phone up her doctor and say, I want that removed from my records. If she's got the capacity to make that decision herself, that should absolutely happen. But in saying that, we know from the Queen's Nursing Institute report that 1 in 10 care homes were told to do it without getting the patient's consent. Now that is very, very, very worrying and very wrong, because if you have capacity, your treatment decisions are yours. They're yours. They're not for a doctor. A doctor can advise you and give you options and tell you things, but doing it without consent, okay, that's illegal.
Yeah.
So you know, you can't take away somebody's right to choose treatment. And that seems to be what's happened. Now, I don't know, it doesn't break down in the article about the people without consent, whether the people that they're talking about had mental capacity or not. Because when you don't have mental capacity, somebody else has to make a decision for you. So if you've got a lasting power of attorney, it will be your attorney's. But if you haven't got a lasting power of attorney, then likely what we call a best interest decision will be made by whomever needs to make the decision. So if it's about medical treatment, that could be the best interest decision would be normally a panel of people that would include perhaps the doctor, the carer, the district nurse if they're going in, you know, other home staff, family as well, and a decision about what is best for that person's treatment that they can't decide on themselves would be made. That's quite a long process to go through because it all has to be done correctly and documented. So it seems to me that if these people, I'm wondering if these people did not have mental capacity and the DNRs were you know, put on without consent, is it because they just didn't want to go through that protocol or didn't have the time to go through that protocol best interest or couldn't go through that protocol because of lockdown and, you know, whatever. I don't know what the answer to that is, but it's deeply concerning.
And the other thing is that, you know, given that there are these policies about, you know, no care home patient with COVID is going to go back to hospital, when did that stop, or has that even stopped? Because it should have stopped very, very quickly, given that you know, we had this enormous, literally a peak and then a decline, and it has continued to decline. So at some point there should have been a reversal of all of these policies. And I know certainly with the children there were some huge concerns about their safeguarding not being there. They'd removed a lot of the safeguarding procedures, and there was an argument over whether or not they were going to put them back. Or when they were going to put them back, rather. And I wondered if the same thing was true, certainly, of those policies about the elderly being allowed to go back to hospital if they're ill.
Well, if you go looking for a written policy decision on it, on that kind of thing, it's unlikely that you will find it. I haven't been able to put my hands on anything definitive. I'm sure there is something floating around somewhere, but not in the public domain. From what I can only tell you from what I can now see on the ground, you know, working with my clients that are still alive because many of them died, there are still no GP visits. There are still no... There obviously are some hospital admissions because, referring back to a recent video, which I won't mention on this interview because it is actually quite horrific, the lady on that video obviously had to go to hospital, and she did go to hospital, so she got in. I was told that and I was sent photos along with the video of the lady in question that hospital's empty. I've got the photographs. So no, the policy I don't think has been changed, and in fact it's got worse, really, hasn't it? Because now it's not just the elderly in care homes. We're now hearing the stories that if I need to go to hospital or A&E, I'm going to have to make an appointment.
Yeah.
So no, you know, the policy, has it changed? No, not in my opinion. Has it got worse? Yes, it seems to have extended out into the community now because, and I think lots of people will be aware that it's very, very difficult to get anything other than a telephone appointment for your GP at the moment. I mean, obviously some people are still getting appointments, but the vast majority of us that might normally have got an appointment for what we want to talk about will be dealt with virtually, which not so bad if it's people like us and perhaps it's somewhat minor thing that we need to talk to the doctor about. But when you have an elderly person in a care home with complex needs, it's simply not good enough.
Yeah. So now another thing that I was hoping you wouldn't mind speaking about a little is the statutory instruments, which is something that you've educated me in, and I really feel that the audience would benefit from having a better understanding of how all of these, well, it's very confusing, isn't it? Because half the time we don't know when it's a law, a regulation, a guidance or policy or whatever it's going to be called. And obviously we know that the Keep Britain Free Simons case caused the exposure of the schools thing, where the government stood in their briefings and said, oh, schools are going to be closing on Friday and blah, 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 and then totally denied having closed the schools and said that it was a decision that the heads had to make. And we're in that situation again now where the masks are being brought in, the distancing for younger children, which is just going to be like herding cats if you're a teacher, and very stressful. So yeah, just if you could explain those statutory instruments and how those have come into being.
Okay, so in the United Kingdom, broadly, okay, the three most important sources of law are case law, which is obviously administered through the court system, hierarchical. So a higher court binds a lower court. That's what we call a precedent. Then we have primary legislation, okay, or statute, and that's law made and approved by the legislative bodies, such as Parliament. It gets royal assent in the end, it becomes an act. So, for instance, the Coronavirus Act 2020 is primary legislation, okay? It's not actually a good example to pick, and I'll explain why. So the other important source, the third one, is secondary, or what we call delegated legislation. So that arises when the primary legislation, the Act in question, delegates additional lawmaking powers to another body or person other than Parliament, okay? So normally with primary legislation, okay, to get an Act through in Parliament is really complex and quite difficult, because it starts with a representation to the House of Commons as a bill, okay, well, usually to the House of Commons as a bill, in a first reading, okay. Then it has a second reading, and that's when everybody really scrutinises it, debates where various amendments should be applied. You know, people say, oh, look, can't believe that's been missed, and that's not going to work, or we need to do this, or we need to do that. And then it has a third and final reading, where it's introduced at that stage without the possibility for further amendment. And after that, it goes to the House of Lords, and it goes through more or less the same procedure again, okay, until it's all sorted out and it gets the royal assent. So it takes a long time. But the point of that process, of course, is to ensure that laws that are made to bind the citizens of this country have been properly scrutinised by the members of Parliament that constituents have voted in to represent them. Yep. So that's why that process is normally followed, and it should be.
A democracy.
So the secondary legislation, the delegated legislation or statutory instruments, are generally used. The facility to use them is there in case there's an emergency. All right, so you can imagine if we woke up tomorrow and we were at war with whomever, not even going to say a country, we might have to quickly make lots and lots of laws to cope with what's needed, okay? And we haven't got the time to go through all of that process where it goes through all of those readings. It has to be done urgently. That's really what secondary legislation was intended for, emergency use. So we call it subordinate law, but it doesn't mean that you can say, well, I'm not going to adhere to it. It still carries the weight, as part of primary legislation. But passing it is very, very quick. So it's just normally made by the delegated person. Okay, in this case, we've got the coronavirus health protection regulations. Okay, and we've had a number of them over lockdown. We've got ones that are specific to face coverings. We've got ones that are specific to Leicester, ones that are specific to Blackburn and Darwin. So there's lots of them. So in this particular case, that person is Matt Hancock, and he has got his power to write all of these regulations, which are statutory instruments, from the Public Health Act 1984, okay? So what he's done is he's written up the statutory instrument, let's say for the face coverings one, and normally it can be written in the morning, and it can be in by the end of the day or midday the next day, without really anybody else having looked at it in Parliament. So it completely subverts normal parliamentary process. And some people, therefore, feel that that is undemocratic. Now, my problem with the use of statutory instruments during this time is simply because they haven't had the oversight. With a lot of the legislation that's come in has been very far-reaching and stripping of people's liberties in lots and lots of ways. And I think that deserves a closer scrutiny by our parliamentarians and those people that are supposed to represent us.
And they try, don't they? I mean, Desmond Swain, I believe that's his name, he's one of the MPs who did actually try to say something in Parliament about the mask wearing, the idea of mandating masks in more places, and he objected to that, and he has now since then been more vocal. I think he's been interviewed on some mainstream media and expressed his concerns there. So, and actually over Twitter now there are quite a lot of other MPs who are really quite cross about the mask wearing for children in schools. So all of these things, again, you can't nail it down to whether or not it's a law, a guidance, and whatever it is. And the YouGov have been asked repeatedly by Simon and Us for Them about the children's regulations, about the mask wearing, because it seems to be a bit unclear in some of the schools where the heads have decided really young children are expected to adhere to some of these ideas.
Yeah, I think that was the problem, wasn't it? Which was highlighted, I think, last week, possibly in mainstream media, where the government said that they weren't going to mandate it, but they would leave it up to individual head teachers to decide what was appropriate. And then we had stories that perhaps they were going to mandate it in corridors for older children where social distancing wasn't, possible. And it all became very confusing for people, of course. And until you, as the normal layperson, i.e. a person, Betty down the road, isn't going to go on to the Statutory Instruments website on .gov and look at the statutory instruments and read them. And we saw this time and time again with the first set of regulations that came in, where they were diametrically opposed to the guidance that the government was giving out. So the government were telling you to go out of your house only once for essentials, to get exercise or to go shopping. No definition of what essential shopping was or essential exercise. Nothing actually in the law that said that you couldn't go out 10 times if you didn't, if that's what you wanted. I mean, we even had chiefs of police saying that they're going to inspect people's trolleys, I don't know if you remember, to see if their food items were essential, when there was no definition within the regulations as to what was essential. So if you wanted to pop down to Sainsbury's to buy a birthday card and a packet of cigarettes, that was fine, even though that is clearly not essential because it was not defined. So time and again we've seen mixed messages really coming from the government. We've seen guidance and we've seen the law diametrically opposed to their guidance, which I think has been very confusing for people and ultimately has led us to the situation that we're in really with masks and children and adults as well, that everybody's totally confused about what they should or shouldn't be doing. And I mean, I know myself and I know lots of people have seen the awful abuse of people that can't wear a mask because they're exempt, and because people simply don't understand that if you're exempt, you do not need to wear a mask.
Or explain yourself. There's no explanation needed, and you're not supposed to be challenged. And it's actually a illegal discrimination to make a challenge.
Yeah, it's actually discrimination, and there's potentially redress under the Equality Act 2010. But I mean, that's going a little bit off topic, obviously. So yes, with it's very confusing, and I do feel for the schools at the moment, and I'm hope that us for them do get an answer.
Yeah, and then more actions can be taken because, of course, the government have repeatedly now said that there is no risk to the children. So they've sort of thrown all of this idea of mask wearing is required and it protect grandma, still throwing that one out there. And yet then saying actually there's no need for them to have any masks. But that's what's been repeatedly happening right from the beginning, and from the mindset side of things, that's my area. I know that if you really want to have people sort of fall into line, one of the things that you do is you confuse them, you introduce fear, and then what starts to happen is people just do whatever they think is the right thing to do without question. And obviously that's in the government's interest if they want to control everyone to the degree they seem to be wanting to, with no justification for it, because as much as they like to refer to cases, no one is seeing in no hospital any admissions, no one is any longer sick. And of course there are, as you said at the beginning, experts who've repeatedly said for some time, and now it's kind of blatantly obvious, that we've seen the virus weaken. It's weakened, it's done what all viruses have always done. And we've achieved, that level of herd immunity, which again has been debated, but not debated on mainstream media. For the people who watch the BBC or ITV, they've not seen any of those debates amongst eminent professors and Nobel laureate scientists and so on. They've not seen any of that conversational discussion to know that actually what the government are saying and what the government are doing really doesn't reflect what these experts believe is appropriate. And of course, Sweden is a perfect case study. They've sort of done it and shown that it worked. So if nothing else, we should be just looking to them to decide what we're going to do going forward. So going forward then, one of the things that I wanted just to say is that obviously I'm aware, because I've been speaking with you a lot, that you are actually suffering from stress because of what you're witnessing, not just in the inbox where people have seen that you're so outspoken and really trying very hard to protect the elderly, so they're now approaching you, you've become a magnet for those concerns, but also just in your work, in day-to-day life, you're being exposed to see the misery of those who are stuck in these care homes and how they're being treated and how they've had their rights literally stripped away from them and their families. So, how are you coping with that?
I try to take each day as it comes. Now, it can be very, very upsetting. Pretty much weekly there are stories where, I could tell you where I need to get in to see a client in a care home. It's a battle. When I do get in there, it's awful to know that they've, been locked up that long, not been going out, not seeing their family, apart from garden visits if they're lucky. I've got one, I told you, one of my clients' toenails are so long, they're pushing through her shoes. The care home staff are not allowed to cut them, but no podiatry or chiropody is going in. It's distressing. That it's also distressing to talk to the families of these people that want to go in, and the policy of the home is, we're not going to allow any visitors until we're COVID free for 28 days, and we're swabbing with the PCR test, which is for another chat with a doctor for you on that one. But my point to anybody that works in a care home or runs a care home, and anybody that is in charge of policy making, is if you still have COVID in a care home where the people in it have been locked up for 6 months nearly, there is only one place that is coming from, and that is from your staff. If your staff are going home every day and mixing and going shopping and seeing their families, then what extra risk does it pose to those care home residents for them to have family visits?
Yeah.
So I would like to see some common sense in this regard. and for families to be able to go back inside to see their residents or take their residents out for necessary things. There's a report out today that I've not read it in any depth. I only caught the headline, and it was, I think your chances of catching coronavirus now are 44 in 1 million.
Mm.
So I need to read that in more depth. I'm not sure, about the rest of the studies, but as you said, it does seem that we are well and truly over, any spike. We've flatlined. It's great news that there aren't people in hospital or dying from this. Yes, we may have more cases, but that's because we have more testing, and cases do not mean hospitalisations, and they do not mean death.
Yeah, exactly. So now, where can people find you if they needed to? Obviously, as a professional, you can't afford to be bombarded with lots and lots of questions, but if people wanted to seek your advice professionally, where would they be able to find you?
A very simple search on my name will call up my qualifications and my firm's website. I honestly am not here to promote my firm. It's not about that for me. I just want to make sure that we do or at least I do what I can to bring these issues to light and to get policy changed. If people want to contact me personally, they can find me on social media, on Facebook, Claire Wills Harrison, on Twitter. I'm Claire Wills on Twitter. It's odd, I know. And I can also be reached through Messenger on Facebook. And people are sending emails, as you know, we set up a Gmail, KBF Freedom. If anybody felt they had a real urgent need to speak to somebody, they can email all of us there. I don't know if you want to give that out, you want me to give that out, or would you rather not give it out?
Well, it is kbffreedom@gmail.com, but also via through the KBF website itself, through the forum, through those emails. There's quite a few channels that people can actually make reports of concerns, and the more people talk about it, the better. So to conclude then, I would like to thank you, Claire Wills Harrison, for being the bravest of brave and for doing everything that you can in your power to protect the elderly, and for anyone who's watching this to get in touch with the care home if their family member's in a care home, to make sure that their family member is being looked after properly, and to contact their MP and express their concerns about what they've learned from yourself, and they can check out some of the other articles that you've mentioned as well. So thank you, Claire, for everything you've done and everything you continue to do.
Thank you for watching. Remember to visit keepbritainfree.com, like, subscribe and leave your comments below. Join the forums, have your say and get involved.